Thank you for tuning in to the Move United competition series. My name is Shelley Fazzini. I'm competition manager with Move United. I was formerly with Adaptive Sports USA. For those who missed today's session, or really any of the sessions that we've had over the 2-week period, all of those will be recorded, and we'll make those available on the Move United website. At the conclusion of all of the sessions, we'll send out a link so that you'll have easy access to those. Before I turn it over to our presenters this evening, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be on mute to minimize any distractions. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions rather than the chat feature. We will reserve some time at the end of the presentations to address all of your questions that are submitted through the Q&A. Please feel free to use the chat feature to say hello and introduce yourself. Be sure to send your chat to all panelists and attendees to introduce yourself to the whole group. We have a lot to cover in the next 2 hours, and we will not be taking any formal breaks. So please feel free to get up and stretch or do what you need to do to ensure your own comfort. And with that, I will turn this over to Susan.
Thank you, Shelley. Here's a few things we're going to be going through today in this 2-hour time frame. Talking about the Move United competition series, reviewing the event director survey that was recently put out to the event directors within that series. Talking about the crazy state of the world we're in right now with the coronavirus and returning to play guidance for our 2021 season, as well as virtual event best practices and lessons learned in case the need to continue this online protocol that we've been doing continues. We'll go through some tentative dates that each of the event directors have submitted for 2021 and review the meetings that are coming up in the next few weeks. So first of all, for those of you I haven't met, my name is Susan Rossi, and I am the competition director for Move United. I'm also still wearing a little bit of my executive director hat with Adaptive Sports USA as we complete the merge at year end. But excited to be with you guys tonight. I do want to mention that these meetings we're having over the next 2 weeks are geared towards event directors of this competition series that we're going to talk about tonight. But we've also invited several of our national partners and sport allies, some national governing bodies, and those that may be interested in the series in one way or the other. So I will gear a lot of this conversation to the event directors, but know all of the rest of you, we want to make sure you're educated and informed about some of the things we're doing. So for those of you that do not know, what used to be considered the Adaptive Sports USA series of sanctioned events will move forward as the Move United competition series. And it's really made up of multi-sport events that are run by our member organizations. So as many of you know, there's over 175 member organizations of Move United sprinkled across the country. And those are in different pockets and different areas, and they all have specialty in different sports. This competition series is an umbrella that brings about 24 of them at this time together to put on summer sports. We will most likely expand that in the future and expand the sport focus, but right now it is a series of summer sports that typically runs from March of every year through July. And these events all lead up, especially those events that serve juniors, they lead up to one of our signature events called Junior Nationals, which happens annually in July. So these are qualification opportunities for that event. There are also great training opportunities for those that want to go on to the Paralympic Super Trials or to the National Veteran Wheelchair Games or other national level events that exist. Last year in 2019, we served about 1,800 unique athletes from 44 states and Puerto Rico. We had 24 events in 19 states. And in 2020, virtually, there was 954 athletes that were served. So great reach, but we'd love to see that get even more over the years with some concerted effort around marketing and outreach. Jesse, you want to go ahead? We put out a survey to the 24 event directors of this series in July, and we really wanted to gain your feedback of what you need as far as how we can help make some tangible tools, how we can help with outreach and marketing and things like that. Also, some of the things you're struggling with, some of the things you're doing very successful at, and that are good, success things that are happening. So we put that out, and I'm going to go through a few of those high-level outcomes from that survey now. Within the 24 series events in the series, most of them are serving the whole spectrum of athletes as far as geographic location. So obviously all of them are serving their local athletes. And what's great about these events are they're not serving just elite or just recreational, they're serving the whole spectrum. So a 6-year-old that's just starting out and has been maybe with your local program for 8 to 10 weeks and getting some skill development and training, they can come out and still compete alongside a Paralympian. And so you've really got that mentoring process going on at the local level, both win for somebody that's just starting out as well as somebody that's Paralympian. 95% are at the regional level, 61 national, and 42% are international. So especially Desert Challenge games in Arizona on the Grand Prix system and circuit, they are obviously getting athletes from several different countries around the world. Go ahead. Every one of those events is serving youth. Most of them are serving adults. There's just a few that specialize. Obviously, Junior Nationals is for youth under 20, through the age of 22. There is a swim meet that's specifically for youth, as well as the track and field event just for youth. But overall, adults are served as well as the members of the armed forces and veterans. This kind of goes hand in hand a little bit with if you're serving international or national athletes and people are traveling to your events from different areas of the world. But 100% are serving grassroots through emerging. And then there's a few events that specialize, or a bulk of the events that specialize in those that also become elite or go on to become Paralympians. And we surveyed what Paralympic sports are offered at these events. The majority, which I don't think anyone is going to be surprised as far as summer sports, are track and field, followed by archery, swimming, powerlifting, and shooting. But this is really good guidance for us on how to help you in the future, as well as a good guidance for us where to put our resources as far as time and money. A lot of the national governing bodies are approaching us and wanting to gain participation in the series, whether that be offering some clinic support or making sure that their sport is part of your events. So this is really helpful to see what you're actually interested in, what the athletes around you are interested in, and what you're currently doing. We are going to put out a survey to the athletes, those 1,800 athletes that I mentioned. We'll put a survey out to them in the next few weeks. We will also ask what sports they're interested in, and it'll be very helpful for us, again, to know where to put our energy and where to develop relationships with those national governing bodies. Go ahead. We were curious about your relationships with your local media markets, and in my opinion, this is a really, really big area to emphasize if you want to get local community support. And nationally, this is a big area to emphasize if we want to make sure the country, not just our niche and our little network, but the grand country and all the public know about these opportunities. So this is an area that I think is worth diving into, both nationally with Move United, as well as all you guys locally, to make a plan and really attack it more full force. To get more athletes involved, to get more exposure with sponsors and media, and to really just let the general public know what we're up to. Hi, Pam. We asked how many athletes you consider successful to be at your event. And I want to stress that even if you have 10 athletes come out to your event, that's a success, because 10 athletes are served and probably going to be better off in life because of the event. But we also want to challenge this a little bit and see if all the events around the country can maybe think about stepping up to the next level and talking with us and talking with your community on how that can happen. It's probably going to go back to the marketing or sponsorship or putting funding and dollars behind some outreach efforts. But I think it would be great for us to challenge each event, including I'm running Junior Nationals, on how to really increase the attendance and the awareness of the event. The majority are gonna, sorry, go back up one more slide. The majority are in that 50 to 150 range of athletes that are attending on a normal basis. Go ahead. So here's what we tallied total as far as our reach as a collective group together around the country, which is a wonderful, wonderful number to reach. But again, I would like us to collectively challenge each other to double, triple that. Not this year or not right away, but put some time and thought into how we can reach more people. And then this is something that I don't think everyone collects consistently. I think all of us collect how many athletes are there. That's a pretty easy one to reach, but challenge to also start tracking what coaches are there, how many coaches, how many paid staff, who's on the event management team, how many officials, how many classifiers, how many volunteers and spectators. I know when I'm trying to work with sponsors so that we could offer more pass-through funding for you all, these are some of the questions they ask. How many spectators? Obviously, that's a really hard number to sit there and capture as people go in and out of the event, but coming up with some rough guidelines on capturing all these different pools of people to make sure we know how many people we are really reaching throughout the country. And again, I'd like to challenge us all and challenge myself to see this number go up gradually each year. We are going to reconvene in January with the topic of elevating events. I'd love to hear from a couple of you guys, event directors, that have some best practices to share, but also we'll take these bullet points here that I'm going to share with you and put some meat behind them and come back with some tools for you in January. So when we asked what you need help with, these are some of the things that came up consistently. Assistance with marketing and publicity, which will eventually lead to what we want, which is offering more opportunity for athletes and getting more athletes engaged. So we'll look into some of the toolkit items that you guys said you needed. And, again, I can't promise anything overnight, but we will start to think through really how to help more locally and nationally so that there's more exposure for these opportunities. Also with media, those people that said that they don't have a relationship with your local media market, it's obviously situational to where you live and the strategy to approach them. And you never know with a given weekend, if your event is April 23rd, what other hot things are going to be going on that weekend, if you'd actually get people out or not. But we want to start that conversation of maybe creating some press release templates, talking to you about how to get into your media market and things like that. As far as education, we heard you stress that it is difficult to secure or fund classifiers. And we heard you say that it's difficult to recruit and train and fund officials. This is a fine line we walk because we are not the national governing body, so we don't own the officiating and the classification space, but we obviously recognize that we need to assist in it. Whether that be working with different national governing bodies to come up with a strategy or hearing from you on how it could be better. So again, we don't own this, but we'd love to help out in this space. Also, just in terms of education in general, I want to make sure you all know that usually at this time of year, the last 4 years, we've been in Phoenix, Arizona, doing a national conference. And instead of that this year, or instead of that in the fall, we're going to do things like this where we more intimately talk with you guys about what you need and who's doing what and how things are going. And then in the spring, Move United will offer a larger conference. So in case you didn't see it, I want to make sure you know that there will be a conference in Colorado Springs, May 10th to 12th. And that'll be more hands-on applicable training. And then there'll be a virtual conference for all around the nation, June 1st through 3rd. And session proposals, request for proposals is currently open through January 15th. So this network, and I know there's a lot of you guys that aren't on this call right now, we'll record it and send to, but this network that we have is extremely experienced in what you're doing. You have a lot of resources and a lot of knowledge. So we'd love and invite you guys to put in proposals to speak at that. We also are aware that that's a difficult time of year with running events. So we'll keep this alive in the fall each year to make sure we have some time for education. So that being said, training and education is really on the radar of Move United. We understand the officiating and the classification is difficult, and that's something we'd love some work groups and one-off conversations in the next 3 months to try to tackle that. Assistance with national partnerships and affiliations. The main thing I could say here, I already said above, is that the national governing bodies are seeing what you're doing and very interested in the series. Not necessarily all, but a few are tapping on our doors in this summer sports series. So if you are interested in different things, such as wheelchair tennis or paratriathlon, we want to make sure we connect you to them to help that relationship take off. Also listed below is funding, which I think of as national partnerships and affiliations as well. We are working hard behind the scenes with different national partners and sponsors to try to create as much pass-through funding as possible. So those will be different annually. They will come and go, but just know that we are going to bat for you to try to get as much opportunity in that space as possible. 2 more, and then I will move on. One, you guys mentioned data, and I know we mentioned it in a meeting earlier this week. Data is a beast. Data is hard to figure out. Data is an ongoing question to figure out how to solve. A couple things here, and again, this isn't an overnight fix, but we are working on revisions to what was previously called SAMS. I know just from personal opinion that some people like it, some people don't, but we're expanding on that and trying to bring it into the year 2021, and we'll release that by 2022. So we may tap into you guys for questions you have to make it more efficient and how it could be user friendly for you. The other thing I want to mention about data is that if you didn't hear, Move United has recently created a DEI team, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're doing a lot of work around looking at what information needs to be collected. And so in January, when we regroup for elevating events, we will present that to you in hopes that you also start collecting some of those things around race and gender and ethnicity and nationality and so on and so forth. Krista, who's with Move United, has also done a good job defining those. I don't know about you, but I personally get confused about the difference between all of those words. So we'll be able to pass that your way in January as well. And all of this data is just really important. I know, in my opinion, it's not fun. It's not fun to collect or talk about or anything like that, but it's important for us to try to paint a picture of who we're all collectively serving around the country so that we could identify where the gaps are. We can identify sponsors that might be interested. We can target different media markets, all of that stuff to really make this better and make more athletes engaged. And then sanctioning through Move United, we will talk about that on Monday. For those of you that don't know, that's our process of vetting events that are happening around the country as part of the series to make sure they're legitimate in their venues, legitimate in the officials that they're using, and safe sport practices, and really just having a safe overall experience. So that in a nutshell was a lot to chew on, but just know that we're listening to you, and this is really a partnership, and we wouldn't be having all the experiences out there for the athletes without each other. So we want to make sure you guys pass through any information or questions or comments or suggestions, and we will do the same to make sure we can make this as efficient as possible. You could go ahead, Jesse. So we're going to talk about a few things related to return to play, as well as COVID, and what if the chances are that 2021 doesn't shape up to be any different than 2020. So for those event directors that are on this webinar, if you could please take a poll for a moment and tell us how you're feeling as of today, right now. What is the date? November 5th, about hosting your event in the 2021 season. And Shelly's going to put that up there for you. So we know everyone doesn't know. We know everyone's first thing would be it's too early to tell. But we want to force you to just tell us if you can. And obviously this needs to be in consult with your venues, what you plan on doing. And I will be quiet for a moment. This is also a good time to stretch a little bit.
Okay, we're going to give everybody just a couple more seconds here. We've got 8 respondents. We got 17 people in attendance. So we're going to give it just a few more seconds here. Okay, time's up. So Sue, can you see that? Do you want to share the results?
Sure. It looks like a little bit of everything, but the winner is hosting an event in person, 56%. But there was at least one person that said host an event virtually and host a hybrid event. So a little bit of everything. That's helpful in planning for how we move forward with all this. And Jesse, if you want to go ahead and go forward. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about the whole situation we're in here as a nation and as a country. I know everyone's on the same page with we're ready for it to be over. I'm sure people have benefited from some time that's a little bit more downtime, but we're ready to return to play and competition. I've seen some amazing virtual opportunities, and personally, Move United has done over 90,000. It's amazing through the chapter and member network what has happened. I think it's a little bit harder in the competition space. There's some great challenges and things like that, but I still find it more difficult in the competition space. So as a group, we really need to think of in the next few weeks or few months, if we're going to return to play, if we're going to have a season in 2021, or if it will be more of a hybrid situation with some virtual opportunities and some in-person, or just virtual. So we have a couple panelists tonight that are going to lead us through discussions on each of these options. And Paul Johnson as well is going to take us into some tentative dates that are already on the table for 2021. But this is important to think through. And I could tell you that Move United will stand behind your event and sanction an event of one of the member organizations, as long as they have gone through some of these checklists and some of these checks and balances that we're going to hear of in just a moment. Making sure your community is on board and think of running the event in a safe way. So I'm excited to introduce our panelist, Amber Donaldson. She's the Senior Director of Sports Medicine for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And we're so excited she's here because she knows firsthand all of the ins and outs of what's going on with COVID and how it's affected things, especially competition. So if you are all ready to go, Amber, I will toss it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. As we've all been living in COVID, and obviously, it's a part of our world now, and probably will be for quite some time. So thinking through kind of the event planning, just trying to point out some of the things to make sure are on your kind of radar as you start to plan for events. So, and just a little bit more background about me. I'm a physical therapist, the director of sports medicine here, and the head liaison for Paralympics. I've been the medical director for the last few games on the Paralympic side. So work a lot with our para side of the house. So next slide. Most of us know and have heard and seen this information about COVID probably many times over the last several months. But it's very interesting. And as we're learning more and more about the virus, we're learning that it's not just a respiratory infection, that it's really a systemic infection. And, a lot of people have cardiac damage actually after COVID, which is why we're doing a lot of cardiac testing above and beyond kind of, even if somebody's asymptomatic, but we find that they've had COVID. So there's a lot of, and a lot more that we're probably going to continue to learn about this virus as time goes on and we get more kind of data and long-term data, and especially in an athletic population, how that differs potentially. So next slide. We also, yesterday was one of the worst days in the US with 100,000 new cases. So it's not going away, and it's actually spiking. Almost every state is in the red currently. And so understanding how each of your communities is handling that, where your numbers are, all of that's going to play into your decision-making process. So this, slide says post-COVID, but it's really a during COVID kind of discussion. And there are and have been some really successful events that have gone on during the middle of COVID, the US Open, NBA, and they've been able to create bubbles in different ways to make a successful competition. So it is possible. There's just a lot of extra planning and thought that needs to go into that. Next slide, thank you. So obviously looking at the financial impact, anytime you add extra steps, there's going to be a financial impact. And so what does that look like for additional staff, or if you can't have spectators and that's your revenue coming in, what does that look like? How do you cover the testing, the cleaning, all of those pieces? And then looking at the event date, the date needs to be a little more flexible potentially, or further out as you start to look at things as to how much time do you need for an athlete to kind of really adequately prepare, both physically if they haven't been training, but also to go through testing. Where are they coming from? Are they coming from a city or town that's of a higher prevalence or lower, or internationally? And what does that look like? And then, the training facilities, do they have access to them? A lot with universities closing down and health clubs and things like that reclosing. It's becoming harder and harder to find places to train. And so are they going to be safe? It's good to have an event, but if they actually haven't trained, you may be setting them up for more injuries and things like that if they haven't had the proper preparation. So keeping those things in mind, and then really working closely with your public health authorities. Every state is different, and we've been working with that. Every county is different in some places as to what their cutoff is, what their guidelines are. New York is very different from all the other states that we work with, because they require the 14-day quarantine for any states that are above the 10 per 10,000, which is pretty much every state currently. And so things like that just become a little bit more challenging to know the guidelines, and they also have to have a negative test before entering the state, where others are a little bit less, strict about that. So understanding that and also having good communication with your teams. We've had reached out to the government multiple times just to ask for kind of leniencies in allowing us and not kind of clumping us in with health clubs because we are different. And so having that good communication and relationship with government officials in your area, it can be really beneficial, especially if you're trying to put on a program. And then is the venue going to be available? Obviously for kind of the same reasons that I mentioned with training facilities. Next slide. So as you come up with determining your event location, ideally you're going to want to pick some place that has the lowest transmission region. So right now Utah is very high, North Dakota, Colorado is skyrocketing. So, and obviously this is changing day by day, so it's hard to plan for something 6 months from now and know which state is going to be high or low. But just trying to think through that, some states are a little bit more cautious in just kind of their guidelines, and others are not. So keeping that in mind, and then what is the infrastructure you have for that event and your mitigation factors, which we'll kind of go through in a few moments. Is there enough space? And you need a lot more space, not only for the competition piece to keep athletes, at least 12 feet away if they're exercising, and space for treatments, that you can't have beds kind of right next to each other. Because if one athlete or individual gets sick and you've contact traced everyone that's within this space, you've kind of wiped out a whole group. So much as you can keep people apart, keep them in separate cohorts so that, not the entire group or training group is together, and that there's some definition and difference between the locations and the number of athletes or individuals that are in one space at a time. It becomes a lot more logistically challenging to do so, but ultimately it's better if you do get someone that gets sick, you can still maintain the competition. And so then looking at, if you're going to do a series, ideally you would carry that out in the same location so that all of your mitigation plans can be consistent. Everyone kind of knows the process already, and I know that's difficult sometimes, and there's benefits obviously to having things in different cities, but then you've kind of got to start over, and all the different nuances and challenges that a city brings to you makes it even more challenging. So for simplicity and also for kind of less risk, it is better to consider having things like a series in the same area or same venue. Next slide, please. So looking at those with risk, obviously the higher risk sports are those that are contact sports, where you can't really keep a distance. And then and you can have, barriers, and athletes aren't necessarily wearing masks, but, if there's things flying like spit and sweat and things like that, and you're within that range, there's just more risk. Where we've got some of the moderate risk, where there's still some contact possibly, but not as much as kind of a constant contact like a taekwondo or rugby. Where low risk sports, I have those listed there, are, tend to be more individual sports, though like a powerlifting, you may have, individual spotting or assisting with things within a close range, helping with equipment and things like that. But it's, you can kind of assist and then back away, and there's not a straight on kind of 5-minute direct contact necessarily. So just keeping those in mind, it's a little bit easier to wherever you can maintain physical distance is ideal. So even in those contact sports, and we have some of our contact sports are going and training like wrestling, and we just keep we keep the same cohort together, and we don't mix those groups, so that it's just a little bit cleaner for tracking and making sure that they know who they're in contact with all of the time. Next slide. So with the planning, making sure that you really have a good medical team, and this is probably more important than even before, and making sure that you've got a physician and all the medical personnel, everyone is on the same page, and really knows the plan, knows the guidelines for that area. So if you're bringing in medical from outside, that they're really clear on what the requirements are in this location. Where can you get testing? Is, in some places they won't test you unless you have symptoms. That doesn't necessarily work if you're using that for a pre-event requirement to have somebody have a test. So looking at what are your other options and making sure that your medical team is really up to speed and really kind of in line with each other. And then having a real clear line of authority and line of communication. So whoever is that lead is the spokesperson on behalf of that medical team or the organization, that there's not a lot of voices, because it can be very confusing, because it's very confusing because every day something changes. And so you need that one point of contact to help keep all of the communication kind of straight and going to the right direction. I added a link in here to the World Health Organization's mass gathering risk assessment tool, which if you haven't seen, is really helpful and just gives you a lot of the information I'm going on over today, but just a little bit more details of kind of checklist to make sure, especially if you've got spectators and other groups that aren't, beyond the athletes and kind of frontline individuals, how to make sure you've got all those pieces in step. And the CDC also has some really great resources. So like I already mentioned, connecting with your public health, making sure that they know that you've got an event going on. And so that they're, aware that this is what sport, these are kind of our threshold for sending somebody if they're sick. So that you already know if you're sending someone to the hospital, here's what you're going to need. They're going to ask you, you're going to need to have, and that can a family member go with you? What does that all look like? So making sure not only with the public health, but also, the hospitals and clinics nearby, what their policies are. Next slide. And then, thinking through who's going to be at the event. Are you going to limit it really only to the essentials of the athletes, coaches, kind of the bare bones, or do you extend that to media and volunteers? Other, massage therapists, we have ended all our contracts with massage therapists because it's partly because our massage therapists are out working in the community. And so mixing individuals who work with community members is a higher risk. And also they have a long sustained treatment. If they're doing, 2-minute flushes, that's different than a 60-minute or 30-minute recovery treatment. And so they just tend to be higher risk because of those reasons. And so, keeping that in mind, something that maybe you've always had in an event, in this instance, may be something that it's not going to be possible. And then obviously spectators and vendors, and every layer of those adds more risk. It's possible to have all those pieces. Obviously, we've seen events go on with people in the stands. It just becomes a lot harder, and you're going to need a lot more people to help with those mitigation and making sure that that is well communicated and signage and all of that. And then your check-in point of what are you, are you doing temperature checks? Are you making sure everyone wears masks? What are all those steps, and that's clearly communicated before people show up at the door. And then event participation screening, what does that look like both domestically and internationally? And this is where it becomes a bit more challenging again. If they're coming not only from states that may be higher risk, but internationally, now they've sat on a plane from Europe for 12 hours. All of these kind of things. Are you going to require that they have a quarantine or a test or 2 tests? We test on day 4 and 5, where you have the highest viral load. And so we do those tests. Doing tests on day 1 doesn't really give you much information unless you've, got symptoms typically. But day 4 and 5 and doing a 2-day test is typically better, so that you have less risk of missing it. But obviously that's a little bit harder. It's expensive. Most hospitals don't allow you to have a two tests, and insurance will usually only cover 1 test. So being creative with that, or having somebody get a test prior to arrival and, prior to departure and on arrival, things like that. So thinking through some of those, but it becomes a little bit more challenging. And again, I kind of point you back, if you can have good relationships with your medical facilities, they may be able to help you with those guidelines. And then obviously this population, the para population, almost all of your athletes are going to be at high risk for a variety of reasons. And so, that is really key. And I think why we're, just even more cautious around our Paralympic population and making sure that we've got an even bigger kind of bubble and caution, tape around them, just because, if they do get impacted by COVID, it could be very, very bad. And so just being a lot more careful and making sure that, those things are clear. Another thing that, and I think I mentioned a little bit later, is having a contract, because a lot of athletes, they're so excited to compete. They don't want to share that, I've really got a sniffly nose, or now I can't taste, or something. I'm just going to keep it to myself. That is really dangerous in this scenario and situation. So making sure that it's a safe environment, that they feel like they can share that information, and whether that's a symptom tracking. We do kind of a symptom tracking 3 times a day. The athletes get it, and they have to enter their symptoms and take their own temperatures. And that just helps us. We've been able to pick up on people very early with little things and find out, is this something we need to be worried about or not? And so having some information like that is really critical. Next slide. Making sure that you have enough PPE and equipment. So, the full shields, masks, covers, gloves, shoe covers, all of that for coming in contact with those who may have an infection. And thinking about all of these people that come in contact with, individuals, including transportation is another one that I think is on there. If you're transporting an athlete to the hospital or between their hotel and not, all of these different scenarios are places where either that individual who's driving and is typically out in the community could be a risk to your athletes, or vice versa. And also making sure, all of the equipment, the cars are cleaned in between use, and all of these kind of next steps, your buses, all of those type of things. So thinking through that. And then, the location of your medical clinic within the facility, having isolation rooms so that if you do have someone that has symptoms, you can isolate them from the rest of the group until you determine, are they symptomatic that you want to send them to a facility or not? Do you send them by ambulance? What does that, access routes look like? And making sure your security is well aware of that, so we don't have, possible positives walking around the venue trying to find the ambulance or different things like that. You have very clear, here's where I put them. It's right near the door where the ambulance goes. So thinking about that. And then, like I said, the cleaning protocol, making sure everyone's staying distanced, with your check-ins or things like that. We're using thermal cameras, asking the signs and symptom questions. All of those kind of things help to reduce the risk. Somebody could always, get through, but it's kind of what you can do to the best of your ability, and hope that everyone is kind of on board and being honest with that as they go in. Next slide, please. So obviously, like I mentioned, making sure education, both to the athletes, the teams, and those, family members, spectators who are coming in. What is the process? What does that look like? What are we expecting of you? Here's what it's going to be. It's going to look and feel very different than a previous, pre-COVID event. It's going to take longer to get through your event because we're, having to do additional testing or making sure all these other pieces are in place. The screenings, all of those. Trying to keep that social and physical distancing, separating between venues, the cohorts, like I mentioned, having lots and lots of hand sanitizer and tissues and garbage cans and all of that stuff where you can't, like, you almost have to trip over it because it's just all right there. Just to make sure, not allowing water fountains or places where, we could have super germ fests, making sure people bring their own water bottles, and just thinking through some of those things that just, kind of maybe fall off the radar, but those areas where there's a lot of touches and surface areas, making sure that we clean that really well. And I think that's a really key piece with our para population, just because a lot of times, they've got their wheelchairs or, they're touching the walls and different things like that to get around, and they're just at more risk for that. So making sure we emphasize, don't touch your face, don't, all of these things, especially if they're in their wheelies and then, are touching their face, which we try to educate anyway, but now is really not a time to do that. Making sure everything is clean, having really good cleaning staff, who are all, again, wearing their PPE. Having people bring their own food instead of having cafeteria type or delivery, or, places where there's a lot of interaction with food, having things pre-wrapped or packaged so that there's less contact and it's kind of more consistent. And as I mentioned, the athlete agreement. Next slide, please. So if there is an infection suspected, then, here's kind of just some steps. So if it's at the entrance, you don't let them in. If it's outside of that venue, then you're going through kind of the things we talked about, looking at the signs and symptoms, getting them assessed, and then getting them out of the venue, and then making sure everything is very much cleaned afterwards. Next slide. And as has been mentioned, making sure the communication is really clear. There's so many moving parts anyway in an event, and then you add in the complexities that I've mentioned, and a lot of different people that may have a different role, and it's really critical. But if any one piece of that, if this table isn't cleaned between people, that could be your weak link that causes an issue. So really having real consistent and probably even practicing that before an event and talking through scenarios, just like you would for an emergency, but now adding in the infectious disease piece. Next slide. And that is that. And I was asked to just kind of touch on where we are with Tokyo. And as of now, Tokyo is on, and we have gotten a lot of information from Tokyo in the last few weeks. And we'll be getting a lot more around December time. So they're planning and moving ahead. Obviously, the challenge is going to be getting athletes qualified to go to the games because a lot of events are canceling around the world. But we're planning and we're moving ahead. We are ordering our supplies and starting to pack those up. We've got our staffing, so we're just working on that. Tokyo is going to have a very good mitigation plan, and we will have a great plan on top of that to kind of be double safe. So as of right now, everything's moving ahead, and we hope that will continue to be the case. So I hope the same with your events, that all will go well. And I think we have question and answer at the end, so I'll be happy to answer anything that comes up with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. And I just wanted to come on quickly, everyone. A brief introduction that I'm Jessie Cloy, for those of you that I don't know, and I just recently started on staff with Move United, but was a volunteer for many years with Adaptive Sports USA. So I just wanted to share with you some resources we have here at Move United around return to play. And this is a screenshot of a SharePoint that we have at Move United. And so any of you that are a member organization or a representative of a member organization with Move United already have access to this site. And those of you who are not, we will be giving you access within the next week or so. So look out for an email. And so Move United launched this site, and it is designed to share some guidelines and resources with our network and provide a space for member organizations to communicate with one another. And we've collected a lot of resources on here from external and internal partners, as well as created some resources. And they're also advertising forum and panel opportunities through this site. So it's a really cool site, and I can't take any credit for it at all. So I keep saying we, but there's a fantastic team at Move United who is responsible for putting this together, Kylie and her team. And so I think I would encourage you guys all to check it out when you have the opportunity. And if you don't have access yet, when you get the link, check it out and chat with one another on there. Okay, so we are at a stretch break. I've been tasked with telling everyone to have a good stretch. In an effort to not embarrass myself, I will not be doing stretches. But let's all just get up. Or if you're already up, do a little dance in your kitchen or wherever you may be. And then we will move on to the next section of our program around virtual events. All right. Susan, I'm gonna kick it off to you.
Thanks, Jesse. And I just want to thank Amber. That was pretty spot on what we need to hear right now. I don't know about all you guys, but I can get overwhelmed with all the stuff that's out there and places to go look for information. So it was really refreshing to see it all consolidated and hear from you, to really give us some good things to chew on and think about as we explore hosting our events in 2021. So thank you so much. A couple of the things that I got out of it was that risk assessment tool. We'll definitely pull that up and send this presentation as well as that risk assessment tool out to you. And again, these are the kind of things we want to make sure you're thinking through before really saying yes, green light, 2 thumbs up, we're going forward with an event. I thought it was interesting what you mentioned about series. You know, we are a 24 event series around the country. I think we're presenting some information now, but we're going to need to have a lot more conversation in the next 6 weeks with each other of, is there a good alternative? Do we want to regionalize the series to 4 or 5 big events, and some people take a break this year and feed their athletes to the other, or will that really not make a difference? So I think we need to have some conversations upcoming, which we'll make sure we coordinate. And then the importance of a medical team. I don't know how many of you actually have a full force medical team. I know we're lucky enough for Junior Nationals for 2020, which was canceled, and hopefully 2021, to have the support of Children's Hospital Colorado and a very confident group of medical professionals that they live and breathe this and think about this. I don't know if every one of you guys locally has the fortune to have that. Definitely think that's important, and maybe we can look into some discussions around that as well. I think tapping into your state games, your state Special Olympics meets, your high school association, those things, they probably are thinking about this stuff as well. So I think locally pulling those groups together and those entities to kind of make a plan for your community, this is the time to do that. And then I just wanted to mention 2 other things that I got out of from you, Amber, just now is, one, I think it's going to be, if we do move forward with these events in 2021, the communication to the athletes and the coaches is going to be huge. So you talked about some things like just making sure they don't touch their face, just making sure, you know, they're mindful of this and that. So having a plan, and we could talk about that as a collective group, having a plan or a toolkit of registration, you know, after our registration closes, information to send out of, hey, we really need everyone to step up their game on keeping themselves safe and healthy. And the last thing I want to say is just, in my opinion, this is really hard to promote our events, which typically happens, you know, is teed up now and happens in January, so that athletes can get these events on their schedule and make sure their plans for travel between March and July are secured. So it's really difficult. We will plan on sending something out nationally in January and being very transparent that any day, any given moment, things can change. And I think people are very knowledgeable about that and understanding and flexible about that. I think more than anything, they just want the communication and the transparency of what we're trying to achieve, even if it might shift. So so that being said, this is not the end of this discussion. This is just the beginning of us really getting together and talking through these things. So thank you, Amber. Really appreciate what you presented there. And we want to take the next 20-30 minutes to flip switches here. So even though most of us on that poll said that we plan on having events in 2021, and there's no doubt we all want to do that and hope that that happens, because I know athletes are craving it, especially in a Paralympic year, there is a very possible chance that that won't happen. So as a group and as individual events, we need to think through Plan B and be prepared for Plan B without having to really scramble and figure it out. So we've invited UCO Endeavor Games as well as Angel City Games on with us as panelists tonight to showcase what they've done in 2020, 2020 this summer to pivot to virtually. And I know a few others did as well. Desert Challenge did an archery and shooting event. Glassay, you do all kinds of programming, Beehive Games. There were several events, but we're going to highlight a few things tonight with these guys. So go ahead and sit back and watch this video from UCO as they couldn't make it with us tonight.
You know what, I'm an athlete, and I'm gonna go out there and be the best athlete that I possibly can be, regardless of the disability, regardless of the outcome, regardless of what we're facing today. We're gonna go out there and compete.
Hey everybody. To reintroduce myself, my name is Cassidy Walker and I am the coordinator of adaptive sports and events here at the University of Central Oklahoma, where my primary role is as the event director for the UCO Endeavor Games. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be with you all live today, but I'm so glad that we were able to find a way for me to still be part of the session. For those who don't know, we ran the Endeavor Games in a virtual format this past summer that looked a little like this. Over the course of 4 days, we held a welcome party live on Zoom to kick off the weekend. We offered 14 different sport clinics live on Zoom. We issued 9 individual sport challenges and a team challenge for the athletes to complete in their own time. The individual sport challenges were completed during the 4-day event, and the team challenge took place over several weeks. Athletes then self-reported their results from the individual and team challenges and submitted photos and videos to us. Truthfully, we had no idea what we were doing. None of us did, right? We were all just learning as we went along. And a few things that I personally learned in my experience. I should have put more time in between each clinic because it was stressful having to rush from ending one Zoom clinic to start up the next Zoom clinic. And it would have been nice to be able to stop and catch my breath. Definitely send out emails to the athletes before the clinic starts, with reminders like what the Zoom link is and what time zone the clinic is in. Have a form where athletes can submit their results and photos. Don't have them email those things directly to you. And if you incorporate some kind of team challenge like we did, make a deadline to register for that piece specifically. I would also recommend being open to new sport offerings in your virtual event, even ones that you wouldn't normally get to offer in person. We were able to offer clinics in 4 sports that we don't normally offer at our in-person games, including Nordic skiing. We don't offer winter sport options in June in Oklahoma. So this was really awesome for us. And we were able to attract new and different athletes this way. I would say offer some sort of competitive type element. Our athletes took completing the individual and team challenges very seriously. And, you know, we were super flexible on the parameters of how these challenges should be completed or could be completed. And that allowed the athletes the opportunity to get inventive and not, you know, get caught up on having the wrong equipment or not enough equipment. Though we did not award first, second, or third place medals, and they obviously weren't able to use their times or distances for any sort of qualification. They were being active, you know, not just sitting in front of their computers, and recording and submitting their results made it feel more like a competition. In terms of athlete engagement, we were pleasantly surprised. I think keeping the games short helped keep athletes engaged, though I know personally, after staring at my computer for 4 days straight, I was burned. So the athletes had to have been too. We'll definitely have to get more creative with what our virtual offerings are, you know, moving forward in order for this to be sustainable. But with no financial burden of travel or hotel accommodations that we know can sometimes keep athletes from participating in person, involvement in our virtual Endeavor Games was outstanding. We had over 450 athletes, more than 150 of which were military veterans from 43 states, 2 U.S. territories, and 7 countries. You know, the virtual option was a great way for us to engage athletes from all over the country and the world. You know, and now we're planning to offer some sort of virtual component to the Endeavor Games in 2021 and beyond. Ultimately, I would say my biggest takeaway is that we all really need to extend ourselves some grace right now. This was new to all of us. You know, we had never run virtual competitions before. When Camille and I were talking a few weeks ago, you know, we talked about how you can't even, you know, try to troubleshoot because you don't really know what's going to go on. You can't try to get ahead of it because we didn't know what to expect at all. But the athletes didn't mind. You know, they weren't comparing our virtual games to our in-person games. You know, their feedback indicated that they were just happy to be there. They were excited to have a reason to play, a reason to be active, and that they were thankful to be participating in sport in some capacity again. Hosting the Endeavor Games virtually certainly was not easy, but it was 100% worth it. And I would do it all over again if I had to. It really was a great experience for our athletes, but also for us as staff. We owe it to our athletes to continue offering adaptive sport programming, even if that programming does have to be virtual. So thank you all for your time. And again, I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you live, but if anyone has questions about the virtual Endeavor Games or anything I've talked about or anything at all, please feel free to reach out. If you don't already have my contact information, I'm sure Susan can get that to you. So thank you all again. I hope to see you soon, and take it away, Camille.
Yeah, thank you, Cassidy. Hey, everybody. My name is Camille Malconnect. I'm the director of the Angel City Games out in Los Angeles. I first want to share some learnings that we received from Dave Tustenrud from the National Veterans Wheelchair Games. He was also a part of this virtual transition this year and faced some similar challenges. So thank you so much, Dave, for providing this. So one of his first, key takeaways, which I think translates to events in general, is keep it simple, don't overplan. This was a theme, I think, in our event, in theirs, in Endeavor. The more steps you have, the less likely someone is to follow all of those and actually make it. So simplicity is totally key. High energy is a must. I think similarly, we've all done these virtual presentations for the last half year or so. If the presenters and the leads don't want to be there or don't seem like they want to be there, the participants, will drop off. For example, he said the air rifle competition was terrible online. Not every activity that is a hit in person is going to translate well virtually. To give you an example from Angel City Games, archery is one of our most popular events. We did an archery workout where we just kind of, focused on the muscles you need to improve your archery skills without any type of equipment. And that wasn't really a hit online. So the energy must be high, and it must be something that can pretty much translate to a computer with a creative mind. A big component of the virtual setting is having someone produce the sessions. We found very quickly that it's almost impossible for the person leading the session, such as the coach or the instructor, to be the person actually operating, the back end, whether it's Zoom or another platform where people are logging on and logging off and you need to mute them and have questions. So assembling kind of a production team is an easy way to ensure everything is smooth, and there's less stress on everyone because they have more specific roles. Next slide, please. Using one online platform for consistency is a big plus. So the National Veteran Wheelchair Games used WebEx, and he mentioned when they tried to use Teams, just switching the platforms, another avenue for someone to get lost or need to download a separate program. So we used Zoom throughout our event and also flirted with, Facebook and YouTube. But again, the multiple platforms, it causes people to get confused and ultimately drop off. So one and done is the best way to go about that. And then similarly, a quick reference form or basically, a very easy template for this is what you need to do to access our event. As Cassidy mentioned, emailing the links out. Something that seems, I'm sure, we provided the link here. We reminded everyone there's probably 6 ways right now someone could find it. That extra step of let's make it as simple as possible just ensures people actually showing up. Next slide, please. So I'd love to talk a little bit more specifically about the Angel City virtual games. We transformed our 4-day in-person event, which kind of focused on 2 days of clinics and then the next 2 days of competitions, into 3 weeks throughout the summer of sports, special events, and community building. And that translated into 56 events, not all sport. We did have some resource nights and concerts, a little bit more of that community element, but quite a lot of sport in there. And some of the key things that we learned as a team, first is just embracing this challenge. As Cassidy mentioned, nobody knows or knew what this would be, what to expect. And we just really felt, if we aren't supporting our athletes, who is? And that's definitely not a knock on anyone who didn't try virtual. It's just more of thinking about, if everything under the sun got canceled this year, our events, concerts, parties, graduations, our athletes, have not a lot to look forward to or do. And so just thinking about what our events mean to the community more than just getting the times and winning the games. And really effort is everything. So it's an interesting grind in a virtual setting. It's much more kind of intellectually intensive and time intensive, as opposed to maybe the physical grind of an actual event. But our athletes were incredibly appreciative. The snafus of technology or sending the wrong link or people not, understanding Zoom right off the bat, no one was frustrated. We were all learning together, and just the appreciation was totally there. My second point is to really encourage everyone to just get creative. So one thing we discussed as a team at Angel City is, who are we serving and what do they need? Our event serves all ages, all ability levels, but we are kind of most focused on the newer athlete and the younger athlete. And so what we did that was pretty different from the Endeavor Games was we wanted to create an environment where you didn't need any equipment. You didn't need to even leave your living room. And that was mostly because we were concerned about COVID here in Los Angeles, but just trying to be mindful of everyone's unique situation. And so all of our activities were kind of household hacks. We had coaches and Paralympians doing a lot of fitness and training, but none of it involved the equipment that you would need to actually play. And we think that everyone got a lot out of it. It was kind of more fun and less serious. I understand that's not the vibe for all of the events, but again, if you water it down to what we're actually trying to accomplish when we do these, huge events, I think it's important to remember we just want people to be active and be engaged and move their bodies and minds. Another big point we had, volunteers and supporters can still get involved. I'll touch on that in the next slide, but finding ways for the people that show up every day to your event or, want to just haul all the water in the world, there's still a role for them in the virtual setting is crucial for your orgs and can just continue to build that sense of camaraderie and momentum in general. Probably the biggest issue Angel City faced throughout the virtual games was the lack of accessible technology, which we were really unfamiliar, or I guess unaware is a better word, of what a luxury, free internet is in households. So I think if we do need to plan for virtual events in 2021 and moving forward, what resources can you share in your local area to help those in need? I know in Los Angeles, this year with school being virtual, the school district has done a really good job of sending laptops and Wi-Fi access to those who need. So hopefully it won't be as big an issue. But still, even compiling a list, of where you can go to rent things or what, areas have free internet access are just solutions that can make all the difference between someone being totally isolated and someone being able to log on and engage. And even if it's safe to do so, connecting local athletes in safe small groups. A difference between our event and Endeavor is that we did not have that kind of team competition or individual times and marks, but I know, for example, Paul in Texas got a group together and they were safe and distanced and were able to do that. So a little bit more work organizing, but I'd say worth it if you have the time and volunteers to help you acclimate in that setting. Next slide, please. This is pretty basic, but setting realistic goals and expectations. We knew that the games wouldn't be what they have been in the past just because it's translated on a computer, but that didn't mean it was a worse version of what we do. It's just reevaluating what is most important for you and your athletes when the weekend is usually over. And I think if there's other things besides just qualifying and times, very easy to translate into a virtual setting. And then finally, just getting the support you need. I know for the events that did happen this year online, we did a great job of sharing the word, supporting each other's events, because the competition is pretty much eliminated. You know, there is no worry of, oh, well, they only get one trip and they're going to this event or they can't afford that event. Our athletes were able to participate in everything they wanted to. So I know we had Endeavor athletes and vice versa, and Cindy at Glassa did a great job of promoting our games. So that kind of support is really important for us to all grow. And we're all here as resources for one another. Just a quick note on sponsors. I'm sure many of you lost sponsors, unfortunately, this year with, the pandemic and all of the things that followed with that. But there is a compelling argument that you can, touch more lives, reach more people, engage worldwide, as Endeavor and Angel City both did, to get sponsors to understand that this event is still important and can reach their needs. Next slide, please. Just a couple quick hits on the athlete impact that we had throughout the Angel City Games. One thing that really stood out to me, 125 athletes participated, tried a new sport. So I'm sure, like at many of your events, you get to the games and you're locked into your schedule and there's not a whole lot of time to do anything else. So you play or do the same sports that you've always done. But pretty much a third of our athletes were able to try something new, which again just expands their horizons, introduces athletes to maybe lesser known sports. So we felt that that was a very big positive. And then one more stat on this slide, 63% of athletes felt more connected to the community. That was huge for us. We've been very concerned with the mental toll of this situation, and knowing that, the effort we put in resulted in 63% feeling more connected is motivation enough to need to do this again and again, despite, the circumstances of the world. And then finally, our impact for our allies, the next slide. We, as I mentioned, were able to keep volunteers engaged this summer, which we were very proud of. And a big part of Angel City's vision is communicating with the community at large that, understanding disability, understanding the Paralympic movement, it goes beyond our athletes and their families. And we felt this was an amazing opportunity to really educate those who may not have a disability. So you'll see 83% had a positive change on their perspective on individuals with disability. 67% feel more confident. The virtual setting allowed for people who are usually just hucking water or, measuring marks to watch and maybe even participate in a new way. And I think that really changed the lens of how people see and interact with disability. And that is really what we're focused on as well. So to kind of summarize, it's difficult, but it's worth it. And I know Cassidy said that as well. And I think the technology piece doesn't need to be challenging if you have enough volunteers who can help you. And bottom line, the athletes got a lot out of it. And this is the future. Technology is the future, regardless of the situation. So the more comfortable we can get with incorporating it and connecting athletes who otherwise wouldn't be able to come to our events is a really important component of growth here. So that's it from me, but thank you for letting me present, and go ahead, Sue.
Camille, you're awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your lessons learned in all of this. Really appreciate it. And thanks for organizing the piece with Cassidy as well. So I know it's hard when we can't see anybody that's on the call, but I'm assuming everyone is giving you a high five and thumbs up. Really appreciate that. And I jotted down some notes as well. I think it's amazing that both UCO and Angel City had international reach with this. Such a cool statistic all of this is. I liked how Cassidy mentioned that even if she's a go, even if UCO Endeavor is a go for next year in 2021, they'll still do a virtual component. I mean, that's a really powerful statement to realize that we can have such a bigger reach virtually. So to have that hybrid thought is a really cool concept, to be able to get those people that might not have the ability with finances to travel or health to travel. So that's pretty cool. A couple other things, Camille, I liked how you mentioned not everybody has access to internet. I know that the Greater Move United team is talking through that right now in the DEI space. There's so much great virtual programs, but making sure we still don't miss those people that might not be able to access the internet. And then the opportunity to try something new. You know, you tried different things this year, you tested the waters, maybe something that people really enjoyed, you would incorporate into an on-site event in the future because it was popular and successful. So that's just pretty awesome. So I think even though this is challenging for our time and resources, I think that we might need to be prepared for both, either a hybrid or being ready to go either way. And Camille, you mentioned it's not for everybody. You know, there's some of you guys on the call that it's just not in your scope or wheelhouse or skill set, or just don't think it'll take off in your community. If you are considering it, I encourage you guys to reach out to Camille and Cassidy or us, Jesse and Shelly and I. We're honestly just learning this whole system by doing these meetings over the course of these 10 days. So it's a pretty cool skill to learn and platform to dive into. So let's keep this conversation going. But Camille, really appreciate what you provided here tonight. In case things are going well, we are going to discuss what people have on their radar for 2021. Paul's just going to mention this briefly, and then we'll go really deep into the weeds of brainstorming and discussing when we connect back on Monday for the sanctioning session. But this is the time to plan if they're going to happen, so we're still putting it on everybody's radar. Paul, do you want to chime in and go through the schedule of tentative dates?
Sure. For those who don't know me, I'm Paul Johnson. I'm part of the sanctioning committee for Move United, and as my role was in Adaptive Sports USA, your sanctioning requests will come through me. So we have a tentative event scheduled here based on some input that we received from the event directors. You can see in March, we have 3 events. With Tri-State, the regional meets traditionally are our first event. They may actually move to February. Only time will tell. I know everybody is having a hard time with their facilities. So this is real loose, and we will get into the weeds with this on Monday. Gumbo in Louisiana will, of course, do their meet early as usual. And then you'll notice that Desert Challenge, I talked to Taylor, and the WPA event, Grand Prix, will probably happen in March. And then they're going to also do another event in May for their more local athletes. The only problem in April appears to be in the central region, Texas Regional Games in Turnstone. Endeavor games are on the same weekend. The Bennett Blazers meet is pending facilities, so that may move. And the Lone Star Para Invitational, which is my meet, may slide a week only because it's so close to Texas regional games. Next slide, please. So May, and this is typical, our May tends to be very busy. So we have Beehive and Dairyland, Gateway, and those are all on kind of traditional weekends, I think. The Eastern region is going to have their games at Clemson. And then Desert Challenge, like I said, will have their, not their WPA event, but the Desert Challenge games on May 20th. Great Lake Games and Challenge will be that same weekend, which is both in Central Region. So Challenge Games draws maybe mostly local athletes, so I don't see that as a big conflict. And then Tri-States meet is on their traditional Memorial Day weekend. Next slide. So then in June, 5280 in Colorado, but then UCO Endeavor Games will actually end on the 13th, which is the kickoff for the Paralympic Super Trials. And then after the trials, we'll have Angel City, a new event up in New England, Blaze, and then Thunder in the Valley. Now, again, this is not a pretty loose schedule. We know that a lot of events haven't sealed the deal with their facilities. So Monday, we'll go through this in more detail and see if we can get the event directors to tell us which way they're going to lean, whether that's, as our poll asked, whether it's going to be an in-person event, virtual, or some hybrid like Endeavor is planning. And I think that is it.
Let me just add in there, Paul, that Junior Nationals is, there's 2 different weeks we're looking at in July. And that is at the mercy of venues right now and a little bit in a holding pattern because of COVID. But the typical weekends that we have, the typical weeks that we normally have Junior Nationals, which would be, let me peek, July 9th through the 16th or July 16th to the 23rd.
Thank you. So we'll turn it over to Susan now. I guess we have some questions and answers that people have.
Jesse, if you want to move on to the schedule, just a quick reminder before we jump into Q&A. On Monday, we're going to do a deep dive into sanctioning and risk management. That's from 10 to 11:30 Mountain Time. And then on Tuesday, we're going to focus in on the sports sessions, starting with track and field at 9, then table tennis, shooting, swimming, powerlifting, and archery. That's going to be kind of a long day, but jump in where you're interested, and you'll need to sign up for each individual session. Then following Tuesday, Friday, November 13th, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into classification. That focus will primarily be on track and field and swimming. Then in early January, we're still determining the dates for that. We're going to reconvene before the season gets kicked off, and we're going to look at elevating events. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim Strunk. Jim is on our board of directors, and he's been monitoring our Q&A, and he's going to lead us in that discussion.
Thanks, Shelley. As Shelley said, I'm on the Adaptive Sports Board of Directors, member at large, and part of the competition committee here for Move United. And so I've been monitoring the Q&A, and what I'll do is I'll open up your line if you put a question in there. And I see one hand raised with Denise and Jerry. You had a question, so if you want to go ahead and ask your question now, you can go ahead and unmute your line and ask your question.
Yeah, this is a question for the presenter from USOPC regarding changes to cardiac risk for COVID-19 and how that affects quarantine and training paradigms that they recommend or how they deal with their athletes.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So kind of what we do on our reentry is we check troponin just to get a marker from cardiac function to begin with. And then if anyone has an antibody test that's positive, so they had COVID, even if they were asymptomatic, didn't even know they had it, or developed COVID, then we take them through, we do an ECG on everyone in reentry, but then we'll do an echo and possibly a cardiac MRI, depending on what's found on the imaging, and meet with our cardiologist. So we do a much bigger kind of cardiac workup on them if they've had COVID, and particularly if they were symptomatic. Our quarantine process doesn't necessarily change from a cardiac perspective with that. Obviously, we want to make sure everything is okay from that prior to letting them train. They they're not cleared to train until they've gone through all of the cardiac workup. And so that's, I guess, could be longer than typically if they've got the COVID positive, then they will be in quarantine for 10 days from their last symptom. And anyone contact traced with them will be 14 days from that point. So that's based on the CDC guidelines. So we've been doing that. Yeah, encouraging, and we're trying to communicate that out to the teams as well, who are not necessarily here, that if they've had COVID, that they should have a full workup cardiac wise with their physicians before returning to training. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, I was just curious, since the U.S. para team is now under rules where if they're exposed to someone with a positive test, they're now under 21-day quarantine, which is another week beyond the usual 14-day.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Thank you for your help. Appreciate it.
Sure, of course.
Susan, did you have a question?
Yes. Going to direct it to Amber, but someone else might chime in here as far as if we go forward planning for 2021 season to have in-person or hybrid events, what makes sense as a call it date of, obviously you want to keep holding on as long as you can, but situations in each local community might change daily or weekly or monthly. What makes sense as a call it date? Would it be 3 months out of an event, or just really what you have, what you're able to do as far as how long you could keep holding on?
Yeah, it's such a hard question because things are changing so quickly, and where your numbers may be today, if your governor shuts down your state and things start to improve, that could be better in 3 months' time. So it's hard to say. I think you have to just look at, what impact of, can you get all those pieces in place, and can you do them if you're, in a stay-at-home order for 2 months of that leading up to, how fast do you have to, how much time do you need to get it going? So I think it's hard to say, for the games, we called it, or they called it, 3 months prior to, just because you couldn't get the competitions in, a lot of the other factors. So I think you just have to think, if you're renting a space, when's your cutoff for getting your money back, or,
Yeah,
some of the financial impact what, you know, people changing their flights or that kind of thing. You've got to cut it off where there's the least amount of impact for all those other reasons, not just, I guess, the health reason.
Absolutely. And that was a good point about hotels. I know for 2020 in Denver, we spent several weeks working back and forth with the Marriott. And in the end, they were very, very willing to work with us and not charge any fees. But that is a very big one too, as event directors on this call, as you're going into the next few months and working with venues and working with hotels, even though they're in a bind too. So I know they need to put disclaimers and statements and things. I would try to make sure you're not getting yourself into a jam if you do have to cancel to have a hefty fee. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but hopefully everyone's understanding right now. Yeah. Thank you.
That's all we have in the Q&A or hands raised. I guess if there's any other questions here, now's your chance to kind of raise your hand or work to unmute. Otherwise, that's it for the Q&A, Shelley.
Thank you. So we did have a comment from Pam, a change on her date. So we've captured that in the chat, Pam, and hopefully you'll be on the session on Monday, and we'll make sure that it's updated there as well. So I would just like to close and thank all of our panelists. Amber from the USOPC, what great information. Just gave a lot of good tools and ideas about what it's going to look like to open back up. And then we want to thank Camille and Cassidy. And if you haven't been feeling like virtual is a way you can go, I hope they gave you some inspiration, because if I learned one thing, and I learned it in putting together all of these meetings, it's that even though you don't know, you can learn it. So anyway, I would like to thank everybody that took their time out this evening, and we hope to talk to you on Monday. Thank you and have a great night.